This is Whitley Strieber. Today on Dreamland, we have two rather unusual programs. First, Linda Moulton Howe is going to be talking to Bob Wood. Bob Wood's website is majesticdocuments.com. He is and his son are the two leading scholars on the subject of leaked documents, government documents about UFOs, aliens, and so forth. I think this is going to be one of the more fascinating experiences you've ever had, and I urge you to also go to ufoconference.com and explore the idea of going to their conference in Las Vegas the weekend of November 7th. Linda will be there, Jim Mars will be there, UFO investigator Richard Dolan will be there, Nick Pope from England. It's going to be very exciting. And then after this program today, I am going to get into a piece of reverse speech that was done on me by David John Oates. I'll explain why Mr. Oates is not on the program at that time. Unfortunately, he would not respond to my emails. I have theories as to why. We'll talk about that too. But this speech reversal, to me, proved that there is something real in speech reversal because it touched a really, really sore point with me. It's about a decision that was made back in 1989 not to disclose certain immaterial information about UFOs that shattered me at the time. Now, here from Albuquerque is EarthFiles.com and Dreamland's own Linda Moulton Howe.
Well, thank you, Whitley. I am glad that Dreamland persists with trying to explore what I think are some of the more important subjects, even if they're not reported on the 6 o'clock news. And recently, in July 2008, at the annual meeting of the Society for Scientific Exploration in Boulder, Colorado, Dr. Robert Wood presented his latest research into UFO-related documents. He used original ink on a book manuscript and original carbon paper scorched by fire of an alleged government memorandum to narrow down the years in which the documents were generated. Robert Wood, Ph.D., retired in 1993 from his management work at McDonnell Douglas Corporation, a large aerospace company where he had worked since 1953. That was the year he received his Ph.D. in physics at Cornell University, where his focus was theoretical physics and aeronautical engineering. While working at McDonnell Douglas in the 1960s, Bob said his boss asked him to investigate the possible anti-gravity propulsion system attributed to unidentified aerial vehicles. Dr. Wood said their efforts were not successful, but he knew from then on he would try to learn more about the UFO phenomenon. After he retired in 1993, Dr. Wood has studied many alleged government documents leaked to him by a man named Timothy Cooper, including an original manuscript with comments written in ink entitled An Encyclopedia of Flying Saucers by a civilian named Vernon Bowen. Mr. Bowen submitted his manuscript to the U.S. Air Force for pre-publication review in 1961. Another document from Tim Cooper was a memorandum on original carbon paper written by the CIA director, identified as MJ1, and addressed to MJ2 through MJ7, ostensibly sometime in the early 1960s. The common denominator between the Bowen UFO Encyclopedia manuscript and the scorched carbon paper memo is that after the book manuscript went to the Air Force, it was stamped Top Secret Magic, while the carbon memo was stamped Top Secret MJ12. Magic has long been a security classification associated with MJ12, the group of 12 scientists, businessmen, and military leaders appointed by President Harry S. Truman in 1947 to investigate the UFO phenomenon and its, this is a quote, extraterrestrial biological entities, unquote, a phrase used in other historic government documents, whether the public realized it or not. Joining me now on this special Dreamland edition is Dr. Robert Wood from his home in Newport Beach, California. Bob and his son Ryan Wood have worked together to create an extremely important website of all of these leaked and other documents that have been dated from going way back to the early part of UFO history and leaked to Bob Wood since at least the early 1990s. Their website is www.majesticdocuments.com. And Bob, I am so glad that you can join us today, and I wondered if you could begin by explaining how the inked comments on Vernon Bowen's manuscript reinforce the year 1961 and this odd link to the Air Force, the top secret stamp, and the CIA's Project Blue Book.
Well, thank you for that remarkable summary of my life. And, perfectly accurate, too. Congratulations. Sure. As soon as I found out that we had some original documents, the obvious question is, well, can we actually do some dating? So I hired a forensic laboratory, Speckin, and sent them the original documents so that they could do the normal things that they do, which is dating the inks by a liquid chromatography, and also comparing that with their library of inks and pencils, the age of the ink. So it's basically a very professional process. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, looking at the Bowen manuscript, we found at least 3 different ages of inks. One of them was 1961, which is original ink that Vernon Bowen himself was using to make final corrections before he lent it to the government. And then we have some inks in 1977, which are significant because they relate to some comments that were made on the document that have to do with the clear classification of that work.
And Bob, if there is a 1967 ink and a 1961 ink, assuming that 1961 is Vernon Bowen and 1967 is somebody in government linked to the MJ12 group because it has that classified stamp on it, top secret magic, how do you understand that evolution from 61 to 67? Where was this manuscript? Who was looking at it? And why would Vernon Bowen have, even as a civilian, submitted a book manuscript, an encyclopedia, to the government in the first place?
Well, Linda, in reading the background that Vernon Bowen wrote about himself, it's clear that he was pretty well connected with some important people. And as a loyal American, in which he made a big point in his manuscript that he was not in any way attacking the Air Force, but summarizing how they were trying to deal with this very difficult problem. But clearly, as a loyal American, he would not have wanted to publish this document without checking to whether or not it was classified in any way. So I'm sure he just gave it to a friend of his who was connected, and it went to the equivalent of Blue Book, except that it was the top secret version. And so over the years, in my opinion, and I don't have any evidence for this, there were a small group that were looking it over to answer the question, is there anything here that we should worry about? And based on what I know about how classified procedures work, the first thing they would have done is they would have glanced it over, and if there was anything questionable about it, they would have stamped it. They stamped most of the document confidential, which was relatively low security. And then the whole chapter that dealt with the Air Force, they stamped top secret. That's probably even before they read it. But the thing that was significant is the specific comments that were made by the reviewer of 1977. Actually, it was 1967. It was 77.
Okay.
But that reviewer's comments were quite significant in several ways.
Can you explain those? And was this manuscript kept from publication then through all those years? Because I'm looking at the cover right now on the book that you have yourself helped get out just so people could see this Encyclopedia of Flying Saucers. It says the highest classification for this document is top secret magic, no foreign dissemination for eyes only, exempt from declassification or RADA, which is an acronym, special handling required, not releasable to foreign nationals. Why in the world would they have stamped that kind of classification on this Flying Saucer Encyclopedia manuscript?
We're going to get to Bob Wood's answer to that question in just a moment. This is Whitley Strieber. Today, Linda Moulton Howe is hosting Dreamland. And now let's listen to Bob Wood's answer to the question of just why a document like that would have been stamped in the way it was.
Well, my speculation is that they hadn't really evaluated it before they stamped it. They stamped it first and then evaluated it second.
And it was held from publication from 60 or 61 to 1977?
Well, it's never been published, in my opinion, internally until it was, released back to Timothy Cooper, which was in 1999. So I can't tell in detail how it was really handled inside the government, but the simple summary would be it was given to the people who were in the know, and they were asked to look at it to see if there was anything here that was important. And so they stamped it first, looked at it, and made notes on it, and those notes have some little subtleties that say, yeah, Vernon Bowen was getting close to the truth here and there, but that kind of was all that was involved. And then they kept it in his file until 1999, and probably 3 generations later, somebody was looking at the file and said, "What should we do with this thing?" And they'd received a number of requests from Timothy Cooper for classified material on UFOs, and probably said, "Well, let's mail it to him." So that's the way it showed up, is the envelope from the Freedom of Information Office at Fort Meade to Timothy Cooper with no cover letter.
So, Bob, if I understand correctly, from 1960 approximately, when Vernon Bowen finished the manuscript according to notes on it, and 1961 it gets submitted to the Air Force, this manuscript that was classified with a stamp as being top secret, and it was eyes only, top secret magic, was never published, released only in 1999 through FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act.
It was never released through FOIA.
It was not.
No. I mean, it was mailed by a Freedom of Information office, but there's no evidence that FOIA has any record of it. I am holding the actual transmittal envelope in my hand, and it just has a stamp that says Freedom of Information Privacy Office, U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, attention, MCSF-F1, Fort Meade, Maryland.
So what you're saying is that Fort Meade, Maryland, somebody just sent this sort of blind, no letter, nothing, to Timothy Cooper.
Right.
Who had been filing FOIA requests on UFO information.
Yeah, with a dozen different agencies.
But Timothy Cooper, was not specifically going after the encyclopedia. No,
he had no clue it existed. Nor was he going after the burned memo, which is the other one we were talking about.
Right.
He had no expectation that he was going to receive that.
Well, in a minute, I want to talk with you in some depth about the burned or scorched memo, but I'd like to just go back one more time to what did you think was perhaps the most provocative handwritten comments that your forensic study dated to 1977?
Well, I think the most provocative one is on page. I'm looking for the page right now. I think it's page 190. Anyway, it's the page that begins the discussion. It's a page that's in the photographic evidence, And I'm just turning the pages right now, but this page is in the section that the reviewing officer made a note saying, do not remove these files, property of Colonel Hayward. And then in the last page of this chapter, he wrote this long note in his own handwriting and signed it Ben. And for a long time, we didn't know who Ben was. But because the handwriting in the back and the handwriting in the front of that section basically agree, it's clear that his name is Ben Hayward. And so the next action is to look in the records of the Justice Department to see if we can identify Ben Hayward and his relatives and determine that he was indeed where he was assigned in the military at that time. And that would be an exciting breakthrough. But the actual words that go along with what Ben said had to do with his comments on some photographs. So this was a section that included photographs.
And what did he say?
I'm trying to get that page in front of me right now. And
this was specifically about photographs that Vern Bowen had put into his encyclopedia.
It began that way, yes.
And was this Hayward objecting to the use of the photos as if the photos are, in fact, of real unidentified aerial machines?
Well, no, he was just commenting on the photos. I found this page here now, yeah, here we go. Vernon Bowen's text basically said, "Look at the photos of Farmer Trent's flying saucer, the photograph taken by Giuseppe Grasso over Taormina, Sicily. Compare them." And so, the Trent photograph was available publicly,
right?
But the Giuseppe Grasso one, I've never seen.
Until you saw this manuscript.
Yeah, I've never seen a reference to it, and I have never seen that photograph either.
So the Trent, Oregon photo and one in Sicily, Italy, they look very similar.
That's right. Now, I've seen the one taken by the French Air Force pilot that looks similar to the Trent photograph, but I've never seen this third one.
So what did Hayward say about them?
Well, what he said was he circled the words "compare them," and he said, "Good comparison." Then the photos were analyzed at NPIC and show similar characteristics to those seen in New Mexico. Photos in the white-hot folder are not available as they are top-secret restricted data. AS2 requires letter of authority before showing them. Must have majestic review before visiting Blue Room facility. That's his first paragraph. And his second paragraph is suggest you call Nate for appointment to WP, which stands for Wright-Patterson, of course. Would also recommend prior approval from Van. Not sure which Van that is.
But you've already mentioned what could be Nate Twining,
yeah,
Vannevar Bush, both involved with MJ12, and he's referencing a blue room at Wright-Patterson.
Exactly, yeah, in handwriting. So this handwriting, checks for the handwriting of Colonel Hayward at the front, and I think this is an exciting new piece of research that is on my plate to follow up on. It shouldn't be hard.
And it is tying so many threads together.
Yeah.
It is tying that in 1960 to 61 period that a civilian would feel that they had an obligation to send a civilian manuscript to the Air Force for review, and that the Air Force would then bottle this up with a high classification all the way till a mysterious release in 1999.
Yeah.
And that inside of it are handwritten notes by whoever was holding on to this, a man named Hayward, that you're going to follow forward more, and that what he was saying is that these photographs match discs or craft that have been photographed or seen in New Mexico, and that Nate Twining and probably Vannevar Bush need to look at this and be checked with, and that he is before going to the Blue Room in Wright-Patterson.
That's true, but in addition, you can read the note as if it's a note to someone else who is trying to learn more about the subject, who is a good friend of Ben.
Ben Hayward.
But we don't know who that is, who the note is written to. So there's a little bit of mystery here.
Right. But it certainly is tying pieces that all of us have been familiar with through the years. And I wonder now, Bob, I'd like to move on to the scorched original carbon document, which it seems logical that it was written at about the same time that Vernon Bowen was submitting his manuscript. And talk a tiny bit here, a background, that Tim Cooper, who you had been dealing with since the 90s, that Tim Cooper's father, Harry Bob Cooper, had worked at Holloman Air Force Base in the late 1940s, and we know that there are all of the notorious crash stories from 1947 and beyond, and that he, Harry Bob Cooper, was allegedly exposed to top-secret information about a UFO research program. Tim Cooper told you that he was with his father on November 22nd, 1963, after President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And Tim Cooper described to you seeing his father's eyes fill with tears as he said, quote, "They really did it," unquote. And that is, and we've talked about that, and that is what led Timothy Cooper to become very interested in the John F. Kennedy assassination.
That's exactly what I remember.
Okay, and Timothy Cooper went on to file all of these many persistent Freedom of Information requests back in the 1980s for assassination information,
yes,
along with FOIAs for UFO information. So he had two tracks going with the Freedom of Information Act office.
Yes.
And eventually, Tim Cooper received many leaked documents, and this one memo draft stands out because it is 9 pages of original carbon copies.
Correct.
Each page is scorched, and the burned memo was sent to Timothy Cooper with a cover letter dated June 23rd, 1999, and that cover letter begins, quote, "I am a retired CIA counterintelligence officer who worked for Jim Angleton from 1960 to 1974. And James Angleton was the longest-serving chief of the Central Intelligence Counterintelligence Staff who has ever served. He served from 54 to 74.
Right.
And he was appointed by Alan W. Dulles, CIA director." Now, the cover letter continued, quote, "When Jim died in 1987, it was my responsibility to go through his secret files and take inventory of sensitive files that would connect MJ12 to JFK's murder." I'm quoting from the cover letter.
Yeah, that's right.
This document did not exist officially and has never been disclosed within the agency, meaning CIA.
Right.
Then he says, all caps, AWD, which I'm assuming is Alan W. Dulles,
I think so,
was very fearful of disclosure to unauthorized channels and leaks in the White House. I literally snatched the directives from the fire and have kept them safe from review. This carbon copy is the only link to MJ12, and don't expect any more in the future, unquote. And I'm quoting an excerpt from the cover letter that came with the 9 pages of original carbon. Now, assuming that AWD, Alan W. Dulles, is perhaps the writer of this carbon, which is implied by the cover letter.
Yes.
He was CIA director until 1961, and then in November of 61, President Kennedy replaced Dulles with John McCone. And in one paragraph of text on the very first page of this scorched memo, it says, quote, and this is AWD, is possibly the writer, which is identified as Director, Central Intelligence, and then in parens it's put MJ1, addressed to MJ2 through MJ7, and here is the text on this first page that I think is so significant to what I'm going to ask you about.
Exactly.
Quote, as you must know, Lancer has made some inquiries regarding our activities, the implication MJ12, regarding our activities which we cannot allow, unquote. Bob, who was Lancer in 1961?
Okay, we've got to take a break. We will be right back. And now we're going to find out from Bob Wood just who Lancer was.
Lancer was the code name that they used for the president.
For John F. Kennedy. Right. And Jacqueline Kennedy's code name was Lyric. And nobody living in the United States in 1960 to 63 knew that Lancer and Lyric were the code names used by the Security Service in their protection of the President and First Lady. Have you been able to definitively prove an approximate date of the scorched carbon memo that was typed up?
No. It's either 62 or 63.
So it is tied down to 62 or 63.
Well, I think so. Basically, because of the content.
Well, in terms of the content, but is there anything you've been able to do forensically about the carbon dating?
No, actually, but that's a good point. I've decided that I'm going to resubmit these pages back to Specken Laboratories or another laboratory, and have them reevaluated from the point of view of some tabs and the ink on the tabs that were used. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but in those days they used to have little round tabs that had a couple of flaps.
Right.
You could lick and then put on a page, and they would stick out and permit you to easily find the location in a document. And these tabs are all labeled A through H, and they have ink on them. So that ink can be dated. The tab itself probably can be dated in terms of their availability. And in addition, I've never asked the question of whether you can get any information about the scorching of the pages, anything on the timing of that. Plus, I would like to get another check on the date of the ink, right. The top secret MJ12 ink.
It certainly seems so significant if Alan W. Dulles is the writer of this memorandum and that it is absolutely what the cover letter says, a one-of-a-kind memorandum sent to MJ2 through MJ7 asking for their agreement with what is in this memorandum. And if the writer was Alan W. Dulles, then, Bob, it means that a plot or plan was being set in motion early in that presidency before John McCone took over, or that the man that JFK appointed, if he's the writer, then it's even more difficult to understand. And to go into this more about the implications, the startling implications of this Byrne memo, after the reference to not allowing Lancer to make any inquiries about what MJ12 is doing on the first page, the next page labeled tab A with one of those little tabs you were just talking about.
Yeah.
It reads, quote, directive regarding President's eyes only. In the likely event that the subject of unidentified flying objects or unconventional aerial weapons is a subject matter under discussion with the chief executive, that's the president, under no circumstances should a member, meaning MJ12, suggest or by inference that the subject is classified as a national security threat, unquote. Now, how do you interpret unidentified flying objects in the same paragraph referenced as a national security threat?
Well, my interpretation is that if they were declared to be a national security threat, then that would permit, under the regulations that define, what the Air Force, Army, Navy, Marines do, as partly as their responsibility. And so that would permit the total access to the UFO data by those parts of the Department of Defense. And so they couldn't afford to have that happen without the individual control that they had been so successful all these years back from the early 40s.
But based on all my research back to the 40s and talking with people like former New Mexico State Representative Andrew Kistner, he had his own private leaks from the Naval Research Laboratory at White Sands, as well as people working at White Sands in the 90s, and they told him that our government, and included Twining, was assessing we'll call them the unidentified aerial craft or unidentified flying objects in the sky that the public knew as UFOs, but the government was calling UAVs or UACs, that they, Kistner is saying, they were identifying these disks as an enemy, as a threat. And I'm curious, in the documents that have been already released at your and Ryan's www.majesticdocuments.com, there is that white-hot MJ12 paper and others that literally talk about our government being aware in the 1940s that our bombers were disappearing in the sky, once with a nuclear weapon, and they were absolutely going crazy. What in the world are we dealing with that it can take a bomber with a nuclear armed weapon out of the sky?
There's no question but what they were a national security threat in the context that we were losing airplanes, both civilian and military. And there's no question but what all the agencies of the government, military, and the AEC also, had been involved in various aspects of individual events where they had recovered a craft or something like that. But the overall synthesis of the entire program was what MJ12 was controlling. And in particular, if MJ stands for Majestic and Jehovah, if Jehovah was in fact the reverse engineering of the craft,
right,
which is where they're trying to go, they were trying to, the people in charge, MJ1 through 12, were trying to make sure that only they had the whole picture. And only they would be the ones to get the benefit of the results of reverse engineering and control that in a national sense. That's my opinion.
But that says to me, Bob, if your interpretation were correct, it means that there was an ad hoc taking power into its own control within the United States government that early on, from at least Allen Dulles, said nobody, including the President of the United States, is going to know about extraterrestrial biological entities and their advanced craft and technology. That's
exactly right. Before we go on, I want to go back to the first page of this memo and point out something that I don't know that we've discussed, and that is it says in handwriting, in pencil, do not remove from the safe, Fritz for JJA. And, you mentioned that JJA was James Jesus Angleton, the head of counterintelligence. But we never discussed who Fritz is.
Okay.
Did you know that the Dallas chief of homicide was J. Will Fritz?
No.
Well, it's intriguing to me that if we could get copies of the handwriting of J. Will Fritz and compare them against this handwriting, and if they were to agree, that would be very significant in providing a further link between the assassination and the CIA.
And what you mean is, if this memo was written, let's say, by Allen W. Dulles, and we're going to go into details here in a second, and he was no longer officially the director of the CIA by November of 1961 because he was replaced by John McCone, but that a plan might have been already set in motion with details on the ready, with the same people that were involved with police, security, the CIA, MJ12, and whoever the assassins were officially.
That's a speculation that would have merit if and only if the handwriting matches. But certainly it should be a relatively easy thing to get a sample of handwriting from J. Will Fritz if he's still alive.
Okay, and that's another piece of research that hopefully you can do and that we might learn about in the future, and leading up to why this memo may tie all of these ingredients together behind the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Could you briefly summarize what is in tabs B through G, and then let's concentrate on tab H?
Okay. Well, basically tab B is entitled Directive Regarding Need to Know, and it basically says don't tell J. Edgar Hoover anything more than you have to.
He was the FBI director.
FBI director, right.
And the MJ12 would not want the FBI to know because they were trying to snoop around?
Oh, the FBI snooped everywhere, and they didn't want them snooping in this area. Yeah, that's right. The third tab C is a directive regarding DOD 5200.1, and what they're saying there is that there is one exception for the DOD that where they can have some information about this subject, and that's covered under 5200.1. But it's very limited. The tab D is talks about Blue Book and identifies the fact that the Blue Book is specified in the current national NIE, National Intelligence Estimate, which I never knew that it had received that level of respect.
And Bob, that fits in perfectly to some of the military people that I have interviewed over the past 15 or 20 years who told me the CIA had their classified Project Blue Book in which they were studying autopsy films, they were studying photographs, they were studying all kinds of things privately, but they made sure that they had a public Project Blue Book. This would be the Condon Committee and
exactly.
Beyond, because they wanted to make sure that Project Blue Book, the phony public side, would be the only association that Blue Book would have with the public and the media, while the CIA was working 24/7, 365 on their own private Project Blue Book.
That's exactly right, but I'd like to emphasize that the CIA, part of the CIA was working on it was really the counterintelligence part. These pages, as I'm turning them, are stamped CI, which stands for counterintelligence, and it would be nice to get an exemplar of that stamp.
Right.
To show that's the case, but I think it's not fair to the CIA to accuse them of everything when, in fact, this was really buried very deeply inside the counterintelligence part,
which was headed by Angleton.
Exactly right.
And Angleton must have had a close relationship with Alan W. Dulles.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Tab E. Has to do with basically policy with respect to when people want to know more. They basically says no matter who's asking, we don't tell them anything, and that would apply to the president or any congressman, I presume, and maybe even the head of the Justice Department. That basically they covered all the bases.
We'll be back in just a moment, and when we do come back, you'll hear Bob Wood telling us about tab F, which goes beyond into psychological material and psychological warfare. This is Dreamland. Today our special guest hostess is Linda Moulton Howe, and she's talking to Bob Wood. Bob is an expert on leaked documents regarding UFOs, aliens, etc., and so forth. And we're learning a lot of very fascinating and unusual material today. Now let's go a little bit deeper into the document that she and Bob have been discussing, and listen to Bob describing what is in the next tab.
And then the tab F is clearly talks about psychological operations, and now they're beginning to talk about some code names. One of them is called Green, and units designated for Green are authorized to interrogate and detain any and all targets. So here now they're talking about people as targets. And the way I read this is that anybody who has first-hand information about UFO encounters or encounters with aliens, they can be detained, interrogated, and done anything to as it suits the government without any consideration of constitutional rights.
Yes, and that was reinforced by the Psalm 101 document.
Exactly, right.
And that is where the Men in Black may have kicked in to enforce interrogations with just completely innocent civilian Americans as Men in Black, intimidating, trying to change stories under Project Green.
I think that's a perfectly good supposition, right? Tab G, the next last one, is entitled Directive Regarding BW, which stands for Biological Warfare. And here we get even more worried. I get more worried in that we get projects named Spike, House Cleaning, MK Ultra, Artichoke, and Domestic. MK Ultra was known to be an unethical, unconstitutional investigation of the use of chemicals for mind control. And who knows what the others are. Actually, I think there is some information about Artichoke available, but I don't remember what it is right now.
But the implication is that the government was studying biological weapons and how perhaps to deal with the public as a mass through these mind control projects?
Well, it's very clear that the Andromeda Strain novel has merit in the context of our being exposed to potential diseases and pathogens from aliens. And so it's very, very appropriate for our government to have been worrying about this a little bit. Mm-hmm. And these projects that they're talking about are presumably the projects that would deal with an exposure of a pathogen to either individuals or maybe a whole bunch of people. So I don't resent the idea that we would be trying to figure out how to prevent alien diseases from killing us all. It seems to me that makes a lot of sense.
And that MK Ultra later in its revelation, which was concentrating on mind control, could have been a facet, but that what you're saying is in this Scorch memo, that emphasis on that tab might have been on what are we going to do with what appeared to be evidence of alien viruses that killed those 4 sabotage alert teams down in Roswell.
Exactly right, yeah. And probably by then, 1962 or 3, they were aware of a number of other cases too. It wouldn't surprise me if there'd been others like that.
Well, this all brings us to the amazing final tab H of the Scorched Memo, which is perhaps the most significant in the context of people in the American government trying to keep the public and media from knowing anything about extraterrestrial biological entities interacting with Earth. And tab H says, quote, draft, directive regarding project environment when conditions become non-conducive for growth in our environment and Washington, D.C. cannot be influenced any further, the weather is lacking any precipitation, it should be wet, close quote. Bob, can you explain this?
Well, the word wet, of course, these days means assassination or acts associated with assassination. And it turns out, if you look in the history of this word, and at that time, it was actually developed by the KGB from a Russian word that had to do with the presence of blood, which was, of course, wet. And so it was really a Russian word that was adapted to English. But in those days, it was, they alluded to assassinations as being
So 1960s, among the CIA, the FBI, Russian KGB, everybody would know that the word wet meant you're going to kill somebody in an assassination.
Exactly. However, the secretary who was presumably typing this from dictation would not necessarily know. And in my opinion, the reason that this memo is written not very directly is because there was no need to involve the secretary who was typing it in anything so clearly unconstitutional. And even though it would be presumed that in counterintelligence the secretary got exposed to a lot of strange things, in my opinion, that most responsible executives would not go out of their way to let the other personnel, like secretaries, know that they were talking about unconstitutional things.
And so, how do you read this entire tab H?
Well, yeah, what I read it is if MJ12 cannot basically convince the president's office at the White House and also those in Congress who would have to provide the money, presumably, to keep going as they had been, then they ought to kill the president and take care of the problem. So it's just totally consistent with the comments that are in the Special Operations Manual, really, and that is no matter who's blocking what we need to do, we'll just go ahead and do it. And we won't pay any attention to the Constitution or anybody's constitutional rights.
And so your bottom line implication is that tab H, closing out this scorched memo, is basically saying if you agree with the previous tabs and cover letter, we are setting in motion the plan for the assassination of John F. Kennedy.
Yeah, it's an arcane statement of that.
And would you yourself think that this memo, if it could be proved to be real, would stand up in a court of law?
Well, I haven't thought much about that, but my guess is that would depend on the jury to a large extent. I think that the problems associated with the awkward language and the discussion we just had on when the word wet really became knowledgeable and who knew, that would be a big ball that would be, in my opinion, the basis of extensive discussion. And that might be the way they would escape a clear conclusion.
But so we might have actually the beginning where authority set in motion the assassination of an American president, and after all these years, and it's coming forth and you're studying it, we still might not be able to rectify what was basically a gigantic cover-up by the forces at work against the president.
I think that's possible.
Well, do you feel that the work that you're doing on this 9-page scorched memo could leverage open some sort of new investigation?
Well, I think that's kind of a political question. The investigation of 9/11, in my opinion, was not totally objective. And so it depends on who gets appointed to the investigative committee. I'm not optimistic that our government today appoints truly objective people to investigate things like this. So I'd say, the people who are running this program have a great deal of power, and they don't want to lose this power. So, on the other hand, I would speculate that the people who are involved every so often have a discussion amongst themselves of, well, should we tell the public more than we have? It would be in some ways a lot easier. And I think they write down on their blackboard or whiteboard, the pros and the cons almost always win.
but it means that there is a secret government via the Majestic 12 group appointed by Harry S. Truman back in 1947 that has had more power than any sitting and elected president of the United States.
Absolutely right.
Well, I have wondered about what would have provoked Allen W. Dulles to have written this memo, assuming that he is the one, and that perhaps it could have been written as early as 1961, but it may have been in 63, and we don't know that yet. But if it was written in 1963 by McCone, then I'd like to finish out our discussion in what seems to me to be a possible reason for why this memo about wet conditions for Lancer might have come about. And that is a memorandum that you and Ryan had leaked to you, dated November 12th, 1963, memorandum for the Director, Central Intelligence Agency, and the name of that director is blacked out.
We have to take a little break right here. We're going to find out just in a moment what exactly is blacked out and what this all means. And I can tell you, as I listened to this, I had a shock. Why did I have such a shock? Well, if you've read my book, Majestic, you know that the fisherman and the main character of the book is really a disguised James Jesus Angleton, given that job by me because of the fact that Angleton not only liked to fish, but he had the name of Angleton as a sort of a code to those who were in the know when Majestic was written. Well, now everybody's getting to be in the know about Angleton's hidden relationship with all of this. And when you are listening in the subscriber section, if you are a subscriber, I think you're going to be as shocked by what you hear as I have just been shocked by what I have discovered in the past few minutes. Okay, now we're going to get back to this remarkable interview, Linda Moulton Howe and Bob Wood.
Subject, classification review of all UFO intelligence files affecting national security. The signature line is President John F. Kennedy. And it says, as I had discussed with you, this is the CIA director.
This is the November 12th,
1963.
Right.
So this is only it's only 12. It's only about 12 or 13 days before the assassination itself.
Right.
And he is saying, as I had discussed with you, CIA director, previously, I have initiated blank and have instructed James Webb, who we associate with NASA, to develop a program with the Soviet Union in joint space and lunar exploration. It would be very helpful if you would have the high threat cases reviewed with the purpose of identification of bona fide as opposed to classified. CIA and U.S. Air Force sources. It is important that we make a clear distinction between the knowns and unknowns in the event the Soviets try to mistake our extended cooperation as a cover for intelligence gathering of their defense and space programs. When this data has been sorted out, I would like you to arrange a program of data sharing with NASA where unknowns are a factor. This will help NASA mission directors in their defensive responsibilities. And he is saying he wants an interim report no later than February 1, 1964. And he is dead by a bullet in Dallas on November 23rd, isn't it? 1963.
Right.
So
there's some handwriting at the bottom too that says a response from Colonel somebody or other. Angleton has MJ directive, 11/20/63.
Angleton has MJ directive, and that MJ directive sounds like the scorched burn memo.
Yes, it does. It could be. Now, there's another November 12, 1963 memo that was written on White House stationery that actually came from the archives on the same subject, cooperation with the USSR on outer space matters. And so this is an unclassified version of the same thing in the sense that he doesn't really talk about UFOs, but he talks about relationships with the Soviet Union and outer space. Do you have a copy of that letter?
I don't have that particular one. I have this November 12th, 1963 that I've just read. I'd love to have the other one you're referencing.
Well, it's also November 12th, 1963, but it came from the archives.
Okay.
And so 2 pages. I'll send it to you.
Yeah, and would you summarize how significant you think this letter is, knowing what happened in history?
I think it's sort of a culmination of the main motivation for killing Kennedy, and a reaffirmation of the fact that the counterintelligence part of the CIA was the ones who implemented it.
And when you say the main reason, would it be because JFK now wanted to tell the Soviets everything that we knew about extraterrestrial biological entities and their technologies?
Yeah, I'd say that's right. Yeah, he wanted to move in that direction. And
because he wanted to avoid a possible mistake in a nuclear war, meaning what if the Soviets misinterpreted something and they actually launched?
Well, there's a record of his conversations with Khrushchev that is another document. I don't know whether you have that or not, but clearly he was concerned. They were both concerned about the misinterpretation of UFO as a nuclear missile strike, and they hadn't really solved the problem yet because nobody could predict when the UFOs were going to show up, and how our military systems, radar and so forth, would detect them and interpret them. So I think it was a very genuine worry on his part, and he felt that the right solution to it was to become more cooperative with the Soviets. But of course, that thought was apparently vetoed by the MJ12 group,
who were threatened by. They were threatened in their own power and existence.
That's true. But they probably also knew more about our relationship with the aliens than Kennedy did. And so, there's an awful lot of speculation about how many different alien societies have interacted with what part of our MJ12 program.
With what agendas?
Yeah, with what agenda. And so it's possible, if you want to give them the credit, if you want to give them some benefits, it's possible that they knew vastly more than JFK did, and that their decision to just keep our own house in order and not share it with the Soviets was a better way to go. But I don't really want to defend them in the sense of saying that would have warranted assassination.
We have come to the end of our Dreamland discussion with Bob Wood. Whitley will continue in the subscriber section discussing the connection between James Jesus Angleton, the Kennedy assassination, and UFO secrecy. Bob Wood's website is www.majesticdocuments.com, and do not miss their upcoming conference in Las Vegas on the weekend of November 7th to 9th. Jim Mars will be there, Nick Pope from England, Richard Dolan, Nick Redfern, Stephen Bassett, and me, Linda Moulton Howe. Find out more about how to attend that conference at www.ufoconference.com. Hope to see you there.
Now, after the next break, we're going to talk about that speech reversal that I referred to at the beginning of the program. I think it's most unusual, and I will be telling you in some detail exactly what I think it may mean. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber. A few months ago, a Dreamland listener and Unknown Country reader brought to my attention a speech reversal that had been posted by David John Oates on the Internet, and that was of me during a Dreamland, talking during a Dreamland, and this reversal was startling to me. I'll let you listen to it in just a moment. I wrote Mr. Oates asking him to come on Dreamland to talk about it. He never replied. I later discovered that he'd had some sort of contretemps with Art Bell, and I stay out of these. There's all kinds of fights always going on in the UFO world, and I have no idea even what it was about, but because I'm a friend of Art Bell's, apparently I'm guessing that's why he won't appear on my show. There was also some kind of implication that he thought I was a CIA person, which some people do seem to think, and anybody who's been involved in this UFO stuff has had brushes with the intelligence community, and I certainly have had, but mine have all been pretty open and above board. I've never been in the least officially involved in it. I do know they have an interest in this because obviously they do. There wouldn't be so much smoke where there must be fire in there somewhere, although I've never had any personal connection that would suggest to me, enable me to know this for certain. In the subscriber section this week, by the way, I'll talk more about that with Bob Wood and tell what I do know about something he and Linda have been discussing, which is the relationship with James Angleton, between James Angleton, the UFOs, and the Kennedy assassination. So there is something there. Now let's listen to this speech reversal. First, you'll hear me in the Dreamland, and then you'll hear the speech reversal 2 times, and then I'm going to talk about just what I think it means. The face that the government puts on it is that it's all nonsense, and that can't be true. I lost the decision. All right, here's what you just heard. You heard me talking in a Dreamland. Unfortunately, I don't remember which Dreamland it was, and I hope somebody who listens to this will tell us, and then we can add this later to the show. In any case, I certainly remember saying this. It's the sort of thing I say all the time, and because it's what I firmly believe to be true. Now let's listen again just to the part of my statement that results in the reversal, and then to the reversal itself. So it is that it's all nonsense. Okay, now I'm going to reverse this myself right here in my sound editor, and you'll hear again exactly what the reversal says. Now, when I was making that statement, and whenever I make a statement like that, this is why I know I was thinking this at the time, I literally think to myself about a decision I did lose. I lost this decision in 1989. It had nothing, to my knowledge, to do with the CIA or with the government at all. It was directly with the visitors. And what it was, they had engaged me in a long period of interaction about disclosure and about their coming here. And during this, it started out ridiculously enough with my ending up having to explain the British Empire to them, which I believe I wrote about in Transformation, and it was the most idiotic thing. I obviously had completely misinterpreted what their intentions here were, and they listened to me until finally I could hear only myself, and I was absolutely felt like such a fool. In any case, there followed then a period of explanation that culminated in a very extraordinary way. I walked into a bookstore, and at that time I was often hearing the lady who was on the cover of Communion speaking to me in my mind. And I accept this. At the time I didn't know what to make of it, but I accept now that it was telepathic in nature, because I have learned that the spontaneity, the almost radio-like spontaneity of these things makes that hard to miss. And what happened was I walked into a bookstore, and at the time I believed that the next summer, which would have been the summer of 1989, that they would emerge and they would disclose their presence. And she wanted me to understand how they wanted to relate to us. And she directed me to go to a certain shelf in the store which contained a copy of a book called the Tao Te Ching, a book of verses, an ancient Chinese book of verses. She said, open the book. She didn't say what page to open to. I knew already she didn't need to. And she said, read. And I understood then how they want to rule us, or how they want to interact with us, I should say. And this is what I read. Chapter 17 of the Tao Te Ching. The best of all rulers is but a shadowy presence to his subjects. Next comes the ruler they love and praise. Next the one they fear. Next the one with whom they take liberties. When there is not enough faith, there is lack of good faith. Hesitant, the best ruler does not utter words lightly. When his task is accomplished and his work done, the people all say, it happened to us naturally. And that was when I lost the decision, because they had decided not to manifest themselves, not to make themselves public. And all of the effort I had made in the past years leading up to this supposed moment that was going to happen in the summer of 1989 was ended. And I never fail, when I think of the government and its position in this, and the visitors and their position in this, to remember that moment. The U.S. government has little or nothing to say about what disclosures take place or what don't take place. That's up to the visitors. They do lead in this subject. The government simply follows. They may not even know they follow, because many of them are not particularly well equipped to deal with this and have perhaps been chosen for that reason and are subject to, shall we say, direction coming in from the outside into their minds. I have always been treated by the visitors as an equal in that sense. There has never been any effort to do anything that would control my mind. Each step of the way, things have been explained. And so if you want to understand how they wish to be with us, read chapter 17 of the Tao Te Ching and reflect on it, because this is how they wish to be with us now. If our world begins to collapse, if our environment begins to collapse and we begin to die as a species, I don't think that they will continue to be as they are now, hiding in the background and trying to influence us organically. I think that would probably bring them more into the open, because for whatever reasons they do value us very much. In any case, it's an extraordinary thing, this particular speech reversal, and I've known about speech reversal for quite a while. Before it was in being used in known publicly, it was involved. There was the intelligence community was involved in using it, and I heard from someone that they were listening to politicians on Larry King and things and doing reversals on them to see whether or not they would be announcing their lies. Reversals are very interesting, and we'll do more of this. Maybe even David John Oates will get involved with us at some point on Dreamland. Who knows? Anyway, thank you very much for listening to this week's Dreamland, and don't miss a single week of Dreamland. If you miss Dreamland, you're missing a whole lot. And for those of you who are subscribers, don't fail to go to the subscribers section, because we have got quite a surprise in store for you there when Bob Wood and I tackle the amazing question of James Jesus Angleton, his surprising and completely
.com. And Bob, I am so glad that you can join us today, and I wondered if you could begin by explaining how the inked comments on Vernon Bowen's manuscript reinforce the year 1961 and this odd link to the Air Force, the top secret stamp, and the CIA's Project Blue Book.
Well, thank you for that remarkable summary of my life. And perfectly accurate, too. Congratulations. Sure. As soon as I found out that we had some original documents, the obvious question is, well, can we actually do some dating? So I hired a forensic laboratory, Speck and sent them the original documents so that they could do the normal things that they do, which is dating the inks by liquid chromatography, and also comparing that with their library of inks and pencils, the age of the ink. So it's basically a very professional process. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, looking at the Bowen manuscript, we found at least 3 different ages.
Your point with me, it's about a decision that was made back in 1989 not to disclose certain immaterial information about UFOs that shattered me at the time. Now, here from Albuquerque is EarthFiles.com and Dreamland's own Linda Moulton Howe.
Well, thank you, Whitley. I am glad that Dreamland persists with trying to explore what I think are some of the more important subjects, even if they're not reported on the 6 o'clock news. And recently, in July 2008, at the annual meeting of the Society for Scientific Exploration in Boulder, Colorado, Dr. Robert Wood presented his latest research into UFO-related documents. He used original ink on a book manuscript and original carbon paper scorched by fire of an alleged government memorandum to narrow down the years in which the documents were generated. Robert Wood, Ph.D., retired in 1993 from his management work at McDonnell Douglas Corporation, a large aerospace company where he had worked since 1953. That was the year he received his Ph.D. in physics at Cornell University, where his focus...
This is Whitley Strieber. Today on Dreamland, we have 2 rather unusual programs. First, Linda Moulton Howe is going to be talking to Bob Wood. Bob Wood's website is majesticdocuments.com. He is and his son are the 2 leading scholars on the subject of leaked documents, government documents about UFOs, aliens, and so forth. I think this is going to be one of the more fascinating experiences you've ever had, and I urge you to also go to ufoconference.com and explore the idea of going to their conference in Las Vegas the weekend of November 7th. Linda will be there, Jim Mars will be there, UFO investigator Richard Dolan will be there, Nick Pope from England. It's going to be very exciting. And then after this program today, I am going to get into a piece of reverse speech that was done on me by David John Oates. I'll explain why Mr. Oates is not on the program at that time. Unfortunately, he would not respond to my emails. I have theories as to why. We'll talk about that too. But this speech reversal, to me, proved that there is something real in speech reversal because it touched a really, really...
memo is that after the book manuscript went to the Air Force, it was stamped top secret magic, while the carbon memo was stamped top secret MJ12. Magic has long been a security classification associated with MJ12, the group of 12 scientists, businessmen, and military leaders appointed by President Harry S. Truman in 1947 to investigate the UFO phenomenon and its, this is a quote, extraterrestrial biological entities, unquote, a phrase used in other historic government documents, whether the public realized it or not. Joining me now on this special Dreamland edition is Dr. Robert Wood from his home in Newport Beach, California. Bob and his son Ryan Wood have worked together to create an extremely important website of all of these leaked and other documents that have been dated from going way back to the early part of UFO history and leaked to Bob Wood since at least the early 1990s. Their website is www.majesticdocuments. Focus was theoretical physics and aeronautical engineering. While working at McDonnell Douglas in the 1960s, Bob said his boss asked him to investigate the possible anti-gravity propulsion system attributed to unidentified aerial vehicles. Dr. Wood said their efforts were not successful, but he knew from then on he would try to learn more about the UFO phenomenon. After he retired in 1993, Dr. Wood has studied many alleged government documents leaked to him by a man named Timothy Cooper, including an original manuscript with comments written in ink entitled An Encyclopedia of Flying Saucers by a civilian named Vernon Bowen. Mr. Bowen submitted his manuscript to the U.S. Air Force for pre-publication review in 1961. Another document from Tim Cooper was a memorandum on original carbon paper written by the CIA director, identified as MJ1 and addressed to MJ2 through MJ7, ostensibly sometime in the early 1960s. The common denominator between the Bowen UFO Encyclopedia manuscript and the scorched carbon paper